one.
Well, it's time for the second of our series of informal chats with members of the Honourable Company. And today it's Helen Lovatt, our former warden, of course, and now Gloucestershire's High Sheriff. Hi there, Helen.
Hello, Mark. Lovely to see you.
Yes, absolutely. So the High Sheriff, a very important role. Sadly, I wouldn't say blown off course, but it must have been quite a difficult time for you, because in the past the role has been so public, and knowing you as being such an enthusiast, you would have relished that opportunity for getting out there and getting things done.
Well, it certainly wasn't what I was expecting. I've heard a lot from my predecessors, many of whom are, of course, Honourable Company members, as to all I could look forward to and excited about, and getting out and meeting people and going to events, etc., etc. But of course, my declaration was just on the brink of lockdown. So, of course, all the plans had to change. Initially, I was a bit like a rabbit in the headlights in terms of thinking, now what do I do? And then a few weeks later, I managed to go down with COVID-19. So that took a few weeks out of my life to recover. But when I then got back on my feet, I reflected on what I wanted to do. And in advance of that, I'd already set a theme for the year around adverse childhood experiences. And that is about supporting young people, and in fact, all people, all sections of the community, because many of the consequences of adverse childhood experiences lead them into interactions with the police or the criminal justice system. So it seemed a really relevant thing to pick up on. And if anything, it's even more relevant now from the current experiences.
Before we talk about that, perhaps for in a second, just tell us, sadly you had COVID. I mean, how was it for you? It sounds an awfully trite question, but you know what I mean. I mean, you hear stories of people today who were affected early on, who are still struggling, and you look great, but how was it, and how have you recovered?
Well, fully recovered, I'm pleased to say. Ian and I were both at Cheltenham races, which I suspect is where we caught it. And it certainly knocked me sideways. I'm somebody who never gets ill, so it came as a bit of a shock to the system. My claim to fame is I went down with it the same day as Boris Johnson. And like him, actually, it was a week on that I was really floored. But having recovered from it and now fully recovered, I think it made me even more mindful of my health. So I've started doing even more exercise and running and all of those things that hopefully lead to a long and well life.
I'm sure it will. Back to your theme, though, it must be, it couldn't have come at a better time, really, because, we've had 6 months with so many young people without any education, without that sort of centre of their lives of school. So, have you had people reacting positively to where you're coming from?
Oh, hugely. Well, there is something in Gloucestershire called Action on ACEs, which I've now been invited to join the panel. Sadly, we haven't actually had any meetings. But of course, I've been able to interact with those very many voluntary organisations who are supporting that agenda. And indeed, of course, the police are trauma informed, which is the whole thing around adverse childhood experiences. And I've met some amazing people in all that they're doing. And it's been very much a learning curve as well, Mark, in terms of me gaining in knowledge. And I was described by somebody the other day as I'm agitating. I'm somebody who likes to get some results from what I do. So I'm now gathering some ideas, working with the Community Foundation very closely. And actually we've hopefully got some plans around supporting the mentoring of young people, because I think it's those part of the impact on adverse childhood experiences is around forming trusted adult relationships. And of course, mentoring can form a very important part of that. So there's a plan coming into fruition.
Yeah, and hopefully things will improve. As I say, children are back at school now, or most of them are on the way back to school, and society seems to be returning, not to normal, of course, but to a new way of working. So hopefully, a project like this will gain momentum.
Well, and actually, if anything, I think all that we've experienced during COVID-19 is that we've actually been shining a light on the work of the voluntary sector and all of the amazing work that they do, along with statutory providers, to support our county. So I think it's actually, there's never an ideal time, but I think it's been a really good time to focus on these issues and provide support where I can. And of course, listen and learn. That's all part of the role of a High Sheriff, is listening and learning as well.
I'm not sure I should say this, but I will. You know, the High Sheriff's role, we lost you from the Honourable Company in as much as you only did 1 year as warden.
Yes.
And you were invited, I understand, to become High Sheriff. So is that the process? I mean, how does one become High Sheriff, and is it open to anybody?
It is open to absolutely anybody, and it's a nomination process. There is a panel which is made up of former High Sheriffs and other members of the community, and currently chaired by our own very own Roger Head. And that is about identifying people who are making a contribution in the community. And I suppose, you know, great privilege to be invited to do so, or to be nominated. But I think it's those that are recognised as having made a contribution into the community of Gloucestershire. And obviously through my role in the Honourable Company and as a trustee of the Community Foundation previously, I suspect that's why I was highlighted and identified as a potential candidate to be a High Sheriff.
And were you surprised?
Oh, I was, you could have knocked my socks off. I mean, I was just blown away by the honour of it. And part of that, I guess, and indeed being warden of the Honourable Company, there's always that bit of the imposter syndrome sitting there and saying, how did I get to be doing this? But actually, I think that shows both within the Honourable Company and within the Shrievalty that it is about diversity of people who they nominate. And I think, as far as I'm aware, I'm probably one of the very few towny High Sheriffs. You know, lives in a semi in the middle of Cheltenham. So, you know, I'm very honoured, and hopefully I can make a difference in the community.
And if I may just chuck in an aside here, a New Zealander, of course, which I think is something that many of our members won't know, that you were born in New Zealand.
I was indeed. My parents emigrated. They were both from the back streets of Bradford, and in post-war Britain, to cut a long story short, they didn't see much for them in living in darkest Yorkshire, and they did the assisted passage bit where they were £10 POMs, arrived with nothing, and after a lot of hard work, and my father was an entrepreneur as well, the boy did good, and 4 children later we returned to they returned to the UK, brought their 4 Kiwi kids over to England in 1967 when I was a 7-year-old. So yeah, and the rest is history, as they say.
What are your memories of New Zealand? Because I mean, you must remember a certain amount. I mean, you would have started primary school presumably by then at 7, you know, and had that Christmas. That I always think of Australia and New Zealand as, if you'll excuse the expression, a bit weird, because you have Christmas in the height of summer. You know what I mean? But yeah, you must have memories that you can look back on now.
I have memories of Christmases, sometimes, well, because we didn't have a lot of money back in my early childhood, but we used to go, they have a thing called a batch, which is almost like a very small holiday house, which we used to rent. And I remember, I had very vivid memories of going to a batch for the very first time. And because we didn't have suitcases and things, of actually having my possessions packed in an apple box. It's amazing, those memories that come back, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's a very strong memory. But we had a very outdoor life there, you know, visits to the beach. My father actually built our last home that we lived in, he actually built himself. Wow. He identified a piece of land, and in fact, because he ended up in residential development, that's where it took him to. So yeah, some great memories.
And have you been back at all?
Yeah, I went back when I was at university. I had a summer there. working. Of course, it was their winter, which wasn't ideal. And contrary to popular belief, Auckland can be cold and damp. And people don't have central heating in their houses. So yeah, so there was that piece around it. And then 12 years ago, we took our 4 children back to New Zealand for a Christmas trip, which was wonderful. And on Christmas Day, it poured with rain.
Oh, well. And what about rugby? No doubts about your allegiance, because I know you're a keen rugby supporter.
Well, I am, but in terms of my allegiances for national teams, I have to confess to being an England supporter, much to the horror of my brother, who's older than me and a dedicated All Blacks supporter. Michael played his junior rugby as a 7-year-old in New Zealand, so he's never lost that commitment. But with an English husband, who I've watched play rugby over the years, I wasn't given very much choice as to who I support.
Well, jolly good too. Okay, let's talk about how you ended up in Cheltenham then, because you came back as a 7-year-old and you landed in the West Midlands, I think, was it? Yeah,
my father took a job in again in residential development with a building company there. We lived in Wolverhampton. And then he relocated Bovis Homes. He became a director of Bovis Homes, and he was part of the team relocating or locating Bovis Homes into Cheltenham. So that's where I moved to Cheltenham as a 14-year-old. But I was actually at a weekly boarding school in Birmingham at the time. And being quite a sociable person and wanting to get out and about and do normal teenage things, it was quite difficult coming at home at weekends with no social life. So that's when my parents decided they'd move to Cheltenham Ladies College. So I spent 2 happy years doing my A-levels there.
And then, I mean, you ended up in the law, so you went off to university, obviously, yeah? Yes,
I went to Reading University and then to Guildford Law College. And then I did my articles actually in Birmingham, because I obviously knew Birmingham well. And I was at one of the leading firms, Pinston's there. And then when I qualified, because I was a woman wanting to do corporate finance, when I mentioned that to the partner who was doing the recruitment for next stage, I was laughed at because I was a woman wanting to do corporate finance.
Oh dear.
But nevertheless, I came to a great firm in Gloucester, A. Smith & Son, which no longer exists. And I had a very inspirational partner there, Michael Flint, who mentored me and helped me on my way.
Yeah. So, and the rest, as they say, is history.
Yeah, I then ended up with Wigan & Co in Cheltenham, and then I went in-house after I started having children, and then I say to people I escaped the law 10 years ago. I'm an escapee lawyer.
But to be fair, Helen, you've put your energy very much into the charity sector, haven't you? Because you have been involved with various things for some time.
Yeah, well, I think it was in the DNA from my mother. I mean, she was always involved in the voluntary sector, and I think from her very humble roots, I think she was always recognised the importance of giving back to the community. So over the years, I've been parent governors, worked with the Star College, other organisations, and just like I get much more than I give through. I get much more back from that time that I spend and support people.
Okay, we're sort of sadly running out of time, but a couple of quick questions, or a couple of quick points actually. One, which again I don't think many people will know, is that you are a vegan now. I was going to say vegetarian, but I think you moved on from vegetarianism, haven't you?
I'm con-vegan because as our generation of social life, sometimes it can be very difficult to say, be invited, very kindly invited to people's houses and say, I'm vegan, because they are terrified as to what to cook. So socially, we tend to eat as vegetarians, but I'll still eat anything on offer. And I would never offend people if they didn't realise my dietary preferences. I would never offend anybody.
Is that a long-term thing? I mean, is the whole, you mentioned the 4 children, is everybody in the family engaged with that?
Just our 2 daughters, they were the motivation for doing it. We went to holiday with them a few years ago, in fact, coming up 3 years ago. when we were eating vegan food, and we felt so much better from it, and then started doing our own homework upon the health benefits of it, and that was our decision, really. So yeah, we both support each other in it.
Good for you. And hobbies, Helen, we mentioned rugby already. I understand you're a keen walker too.
Absolutely. We've just got back from a holiday in Cornwall, because Ian and I have set the goal of walking the coast of Britain, the whole coast of Britain, all 6,000 miles of it.
Wow.
We're only 400 miles in. We've just walked, just over the last we had a 2-week holiday, we walked 100 miles in that week. And I just love being out in nature, being by the sea. And it's just that feeling of space and remoteness, because obviously you're getting to places that you can't get to in a car. And it's beautiful. It is absolutely stunning. So
I've heard, I know about the coastal, the Southwest Coastal Path. I mean, that's sort of the famous one, isn't it? But the entire coastline of the UK, that is, how far is it? Do you know? You must know how far.
It's about 6,000 miles, we reckon. 6,000 miles, but as we get more time, well, once I'm finished being a high sheriff, we actually have set some plans in place to do more walking. So those are the sort of things that it'll be interesting when we get to Scotland, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. All those locks.
And have to keep fit. Definitely fitness required.
Well, that's fantastic. So let's end, if we may, with a sort of crystal ball moment. I mean, you've got another 6 months or so as high sheriff, and the world is changing around us all, isn't it? So, I mean, what's your sort of perspective on things from where you sit in Cheltenham at the moment?
I don't think we've seen the half of it yet. I think there's more to come. But with all those threats, there are opportunities.
Yeah.
I think it's time now to start reimagining, because we've all taken different things from this. That some have had a really wonderful time, others have had a torrid time, and I think it's back to listening to the experiences of those who haven't been quite so positive, and then just doing what we can to support them. The economic hardship is on its way, for sure, or it's already there for some people. So I think it's an ongoing situation. The challenges around not being able to plan things, which as a high sheriff is always difficult, because it's always about planning your diary ahead. But it's being responsive and reactive to things, but actually, more importantly, being proactive. I'm hopefully being very proactive in what I'm doing in terms of reaching out to people and supporting them.
Well, we wish you well with your endeavours, and thank you for your time today.
It's been a pleasure, and thank you very much, Mark, for your time. Thank you.